ahead and get started. So welcome to the Beautiful Bluebirds of Maryland webinar hosted by Audubon Society of Central Maryland. It's a part of our Making a Home for Birds webinar series. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Kathy Kremnitzer, President of the Maryland Bluebird Society. Kathy is serving her third term as President of the Maryland Bluebird Society, and has also served as Secretary of the North American Bluebird Society for almost 12 years. She monitors bluebird trails in Frederick and Washington counties in Maryland, including as part of the 4-person monitoring team for the 100 Nest Box Trail at Antietam National Battlefield. And she monitors approximately 80 nest boxes each week during the nesting season. If you have any questions for Kathy about her presentation, feel free to go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. Make sure that you're using the Q&A box and not the chat box so we don't miss your question. And then Kathy will answer as many questions as we can get to after she has concluded her presentation. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you for having me. I'm always up for the opportunity of sharing my love for bluebirds with others. The name of my presentation is Beautiful Bluebirds of Maryland. All right. Somewhere the bluebird is singing, and somewhere the skies are blue. So lift up your head to the skies and be happy, for this is true. Somewhere the bluebird is singing and winging his way back to you. Let's start with some basics about bluebirds. There are 3 species: the eastern bluebird, the western bluebird, and the mountain bluebird. The bluebird is a medium-sized songbird and is a member of the thrush family, along with robins. It's a secondary cavity nester, which means it cannot excavate its own cavities, so it uses abandoned cavities, such as woodpecker holes, holes in trees, actually pretty much any hole it can find that it thinks might make a good nest. Bluebirds are omnivores. They eat mainly insects, but they also eat fruit, nuts, and some seeds, especially during the colder months. They like to nest in open grassy areas. The bluebird that we have here in Maryland is the eastern bluebird. That actually is the species that covers the most territory in North America. The western bluebird has a territory that is west of the Rocky Mountains, and the mountain bluebird encompasses mainly the higher elevations of the Rocky Mountains. The male bluebird is a bright cobalt on his head, back, wings, and tail. He has a rusty breast with white underparts. The female is a soft grayish blue on her head, back, wings, and tail, and has a paler rusty breast with white underparts. In nature, males often have more conspicuous or more bright color because it's their job to draw attention away from the nesting site and away from the female. The female's job is to blend as much as she can with the nesting site to protect herself and her young. Over the last few years, bluebirds have made a recovery. They were in peril of becoming extinct back in the mid 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s for several different reasons, mainly the use of DDT. But they still need your help. So the reason that they need help, though, is because of mainly loss of habitat. Construction and development result in the loss of green space and the cutting down of trees. There's also competition from non-native species, including house sparrows and starlings, and weather and extreme climate issues, which we all witnessed this past year. And the result of this is a reliance of bluebirds and other native cavity nesting birds on artificial cavities such as nest boxes. So how can we help? We can help by providing safe housing. To do that, you need to check to be sure that a nest box that you put up is well built and sturdy. It needs to be ventilated and have drainage. You need a 1.5-inch entrance hole. The North American Bluebird Society and Maryland Bluebird Society both recommend that boxes be made of wood, left a natural finish or stained or painted white or a light color on the outside only, and that boxes be sited in open grassy area. Please don't mount boxes on trees, fences, buildings, or other structures. We recommend mounting them on metal poles, sited at least 10 to 15 feet from any structure, including trees, and that you equip the pole with a predator baffle. The baffle in this picture here is called a stovepipe baffle, which protects the nest from climbing predators such as snakes, raccoons, cats, and other predators. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Hold on. This is the pattern for the stovepipe baffle that all of my nest boxes that I'm personally responsible for are equipped with. I find that it does a really, really good job protecting, especially against raccoons. Larger snakes have been known to breach the baffle, but most of my nest boxes are not located in territories that have a lot of snake infestation. So the nesting process of the bluebird. The male finds nesting sites, but the female has to approve it before nesting can proceed. When she's decided that a specific box is where she wants to raise her young, she will put a piece of grass inside, and that's called a claiming straw, to show that she's accepted that nesting site. She does the majority of the building of the nest, while the male defends the territory and pretty much cheers her on. Female bluebirds are opportunists when it comes to nest building. Sometimes they will use dried grass, as you see in the top nest. In the nest below that is a pine needle nest. And the nest to the right with the two nestlings is actually a combination of the two. Nest building requires many, many trips, so she'll usually choose materials that are close by. And as with other cavity nesters, she will often use animal hair, soft plant fibers, and other soft materials for the nest cup. Believe it or not, these pictures are all bluebird eggs. The main shade of bluebird eggs is blue, but as you can see, there's light blue, there's medium blue, there's dark blue, and a small percentage of female bluebirds even lay white eggs. The egg color that a female has, she will always have. If she lays white eggs, every clutch of eggs she lays will be white. That's something that happens during the formation of the egg inside her body. The nesting process of a bluebird is all about the numbers. The female will lay 1 egg a day until her clutch is complete. Average clutch size is 4 to 6 eggs, and incubation does not begin until after the final egg is laid. This is because the eggs all need to hatch about the same time. One of my Bluebird Club students pointed out to me that a day in the life of a bluebird is like a year in the life of a human child. The rate of growth for young birds is so fast that the difference of a day or two in the nest gives that early hatchling a lot of advantage over its younger siblings. Very important that the eggs hatch as close together as they can for all the young to have an equal chance. The eggs are incubated for 12 to 14 days by the female because the male does not have a brooding patch. They will hatch at about 12 to 14 days, and then the young will fledge at about 18 days. More if food is, it will take longer if it's cold weather, early spring nesting, and food is scarce. Let's keep going. So here are some photos. The first picture is hatch day, and you can see that the second hatchling is about to come out of his egg. The picture to the right on top is young that are 4 days old. Bottom left, the young are 10 days old. You can see that their feather sheaths on their wings are really about to pop. And then the bottom right-hand picture, actually this is deceptive. The three of the young in this picture are 17 days old, but the baby to the right is only about 14 days old. There's a story behind this. I received a call, this was a couple of years ago, I received a call from a lady in West Virginia who said she had checked her nest box to see if the young had hatched, and she found the female bluebird dead on the nest. And she didn't know what to do. She wasn't sure how much longer the eggs were to be incubated before they would hatch. So I told her it was very unlikely that the eggs would hatch if the female was gone. And even if they did hatch, there wasn't much that she could do for them. So she said she wanted to wait, and I told her that was fine. So she called me back about an hour later and said the babies were hatching. So I told her they would not survive without the female, and that I had a nest that had young that had just hatched. They were about 24 hours old. So she brought the nest to me, and I fostered two. I think two of them hatched. I fostered both into this nest. One died, but the remaining baby survived and lived to fledge. So that was a success story. Okay. Interesting facts of life. Only the female bluebird can incubate eggs and brood the young, since the males do not have brooding patches on their abdomens. Female bluebirds will continue to brood the young overnight due to cold weather until they are about 7 or 8 days old and can regulate their own body temperatures. Both adults will feed the young and remove waste from the nest, and both adults will continue to feed the fledged young though the female will begin nest building about a week to 10 days after the young fledge from the nest box. Bluebirds can nest 2 to 3 times a season here. Occasionally we'll get a fourth nesting, but that's very rare. Flight school. I wanted to tell you a little bit about that. Flight school is what I call after the young fledge and the parents have fed them for a while, the female bluebird starts to build her next nest. It thus becomes the job of the male bluebird to teach his young how to fly, perfect their flying skills, and how to hunt so that they can feed themselves. A couple of years ago, my trail at Ballinger Creek Park in Frederick, I had a nest box that had 2 late season fledglings that were reluctant to leave the nest box. And I needed to move the nest box because the park was getting ready to do some work. So I was there a lot watching the box, waiting for these babies to fledge. This one particular afternoon, I watched the mother bird with a bug in her mouth. She would fly to the nest box and fly back to a sign. And she did that repeatedly. And you could almost see by her body language that she was becoming very frustrated. Eventually, she flew off. And about 5 minutes later, I saw her come back and land on the sign. And then Dad landed on top of the nest box. I watched him jump up and down 3 times on the nest box and fly to a nearby tree. And those babies left that nest 1, 2, 3, were right out and right after him. It was almost like he said, "Your mom wants you out, you got to go." So they went. Anyway, Nest boxes should be monitored at least weekly during nesting season. Routine monitoring will ensure that nest boxes are being used by native species only. House sparrows and starlings should never be allowed to use nest boxes. Observations of what you find during your monitoring visits should be recorded and referred to before your next visit. This is an example of a monitoring sheet. You can have a notebook with a page for each box you monitor, or you can jot your notes down on your calendar. But it's very important not to trust what you observe in the nest box to memory. And then refer to that the next time you check your box so you'll know what you should expect to see. Okay. Non-native species should never be allowed to use a nest box. Scientific studies show that non-native birds that fledge from nest boxes will often look for a nest box when it's time for them to breed. Because non-native species are not protected by law, you can use passive or aggressive measures. That means you can remove their nests, their eggs, and you can even remove the birds themselves. House sparrows are public enemy #1 when it comes to bluebirding. Let me go back for a second because I want you to get a really good look at this female bluebird female house sparrow up here at the top. If you take a look at her beak, you'll see that she doesn't have the long, narrow beak of a bluebird. Bluebirds eat insects, house sparrows eat seed. They have a hooked beak for cracking the seed open. At the end of that beak is a sharp hook. And that hook inside of a nest box is a lethal weapon. They're fiercely aggressive to native cavity nesting birds. They don't need to use nest boxes, but they're opportunists. You can see them in the parking lot at CVS, Walmart, Home Depot, McDonald's, and there are no nest boxes there, but somehow they manage to thrive. Man, in his ultimate wisdom, imported house sparrows during the 1800s in order to help control insects on farmers' crops. But somebody didn't do their homework because 96% of the house sparrow's diet is seed. They can and will kill bluebirds inside a nest box, peck the eggs, and toss the young from the nest box. They should not be allowed ever to use a nest box. This is what a house sparrow nest looks like. It's domed over at the top. A lot of times when you open a nest box that a house sparrow has built a nest in, the only thing you'll see is a hole where the entrance hole to the nest box is. Everything else will be solid grass or trash or whatever the bird can find. These are what house sparrow eggs look like. Okay, now let me just say a couple of words about starlings. If the entrance hole to your nest box is the recommended 1.5 inches in diameter, a starling normally will not be able to enter the box. Where starlings for our area do the most harm is their competition with native birds who use natural cavities, such as woodpeckers. They also are notorious for traveling in flocks so large that they can strip a food source that would last a small flock of bluebirds for an entire season in a matter of days. There are some cavity nesting birds that you might like to see using your nest box if you're not able to have bluebirds. Two of those species are the tree swallow and the chickadee. The tree swallow builds a nest similar to eastern bluebirds, but lines it with feathers. Sometimes their nests are a little shallow, and they are definitely not the fastidious housekeepers that bluebirds are. You'll see that their eggs are small and are pinkish white. If I had the opportunity to be a baby bird, I would want to be a chickadee, because chickadees build their nests from moss, fine grass, animal hair, and plant fiber. The eggs are small, about the size of a jelly bean, and are white with brownish red speckles. The female will often cover the eggs with a blanket that she's woven from animal hair and plant fiber when she leaves the nest box. The first time I had a chickadee nest in one of my nest boxes, I kept checking it for eggs and never saw any eggs, and I couldn't understand what was going on. She would fuss at me when I would check the box, so I knew that she was actively nesting. And then I realized there was a blanket over the nest and I couldn't see the eggs. So, two more possibilities that you might get in your nest box: the house wren and the tufted titmouse. The house wren is a native bird, but it's fiercely competitive and it's not friendly toward other cavity nesting species. It will toss eggs and newly hatched young, and the males build a dummy nest in just about every cavity they can find within their nesting territory. This is their way of trying to decrease the competition. Dummy nests are not protected. They may be removed, but if a nest has eggs or a nest cup, it must be left alone. To deter wrens, it's a good idea to locate your nest boxes out in the open as much as possible. House wrens like brushy, scrubby, treed areas. The tufted titmouse builds its nest with a mixture of leaves, bark, moss, and animal hair and soft plant fibers. Titmice are known to land on animals such as horses or dogs who might be napping in the sun and take the hair that they need for their nest. They're less tolerant of monitoring than many cavity nesters and may abandon a nest if they feel threatened. So be sure, if you are lucky enough to get one of these birds nesting in one of your boxes, that you don't over monitor. Try to limit to one visit a week. If you open a box and there's a titmouse on the nest, it will hiss at you and you will think that it is a snake. Okay. So go outside. Mother Nature has much to offer us if we take the time to look. Visit a quiet spot and just listen. Maybe you'll be fortunate enough to hear the beautiful song of the bluebird. All right, I want to tell you a little bit about the Maryland Bluebird Society. Many people don't even know that there is a Maryland Bluebird Society. We're a very small organization, but we have county coordinators in most of the counties of our beautiful state, and we're always available to answer questions. We even put boots on the ground when we're not in COVID times. We'll come out and help set up a nest box or help you figure out why you're not having bluebirds nest in your box. The North American Bluebird Society is actually a national organization. We have affiliates in Canada and all over the continental United States, and we even have an affiliate in Bermuda. Take a look at our website. We have a nice set of fact sheets on topics that relate to bluebirds, and they can be downloaded and printed. And I want to thank these people for allowing me to use their photographs and information in my presentation. So now I would like to see your questions. Okay. How many of these boxes can be supported per acre? Or how far apart can they be minimally spaced? The recommendation for bluebird nest boxes is to space them about the length of a football field apart. There are some exceptions. If you have buildings or structures, you can separate the boxes by line of sight. You just want to try to keep I have 3 acres where I live, and I have 6 boxes, but I have them set so that some are paired. And I'll get bluebirds in one set, in one box, and tree swallows in another. So you want to be sure not to have them too close together, because you don't want your bluebirds to be fighting and battling over territory instead of nesting. Will they reuse the same nest for their second or third clutches of the season? That's a good question. We recommend removing the nests between nestings because you want the nest to be as low in the nest box as possible, and they will always add new nesting material to a nest. There's also issues in some areas with blowflies and other parasites. So by removing the nest, the female can easily build another nest in a matter of hours, and she can go ahead with her clutch after that. So we recommend removing the nests. I have a problem with house wrens competing with our bluebirds. A lot of times, bluebirds will start their first nest before the house wrens migrate back to our area. So usually that first nesting of bluebirds is pretty safe. The second nesting and the first nesting of tree swallows are really, really hindered by house wren activity. So again, I recommend that you locate your nest boxes as much in the open as you possibly can. Try to stay away from shrubby areas. Try to stay away from tree lines. And this isn't one of the links that I gave to Angela to share with you, but on the Cialis website, there is a device called a wren guard. If you put the wren guard on the nest after the bluebirds have laid their first egg and the wrens haven't already found the cavity, you might be able to give the nest enough protection so that once the babies are old enough and big enough inside the box, you can remove the device. That's called a wren guard. The next question. I live near a pond and every year we get black snakes trying to get our hatchlings. Yeah. The stovepipe predator baffle that I use, the one on most of my boxes, is a 6-inch in diameter by 24-inch length stovepipe. And it works against smaller snakes and it works against raccoons. In an area that I think might have more of a snake issue, I would use an 8-inch predator baffle. And sometimes the length is more important than the width. I know that there are some of my cohorts in the North American Bluebird Society experimenting with longer PVC baffles. Some of them are 4 feet long, and this seems to really help. It's expensive to equip a whole bluebird trail with something like that, but if you have just a box or two, using a stovepipe or a PVC baffle that's longer, 4 feet, might help you get your nesting to fledging. Okay, I see more questions. Let's see. How do you keep sparrows from building a nest? Okay. How to begin. The male house sparrow is a very stubborn, determined bird. He will bond with a nest box instead of bonding with his female. You can trap and remove the female and he'll hang out on the box and call another female. I actively trap and remove the birds from the situation. Or else you can block the box and hopefully they'll move on. That's a passive measure. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Where did that question go? There you go. Now, if you have a bluebird nest that is active and you are trying to protect it from a house sparrow, there is a device called a sparrow spooker. That's one of the links that Angela will share with you on the Cialis website. And it shows you how to build it. If you want to build your own, you can buy one commercially, which is what I do. And you need to wait until your bluebirds have an egg in the box so that they're bonded, and then you can put the spooker up. And these devices do work. I've only ever had one breached one time. At my school trail, I had a nesting of bluebirds that there were 6 babies in the nest, and it was fledge day, and 5 of the babies were able to fledge. But the house sparrow, because of all the hoopla of fledge day, all the excitement, I guess it overcame its fear and went in and killed the last little female baby. But 5 babies fledged, and I considered that a success. So definitely give that a try if you have sparrows that won't leave your bluebird nest alone. Let's see. I live near a pond, and every year I did that one. I read that bluebird nests should not be monitored after day 12 because it could cause the fledglings to go early. That is absolutely true. I will share a story with you from Antietam National Battlefield. Last spring was a very wet, very cold spring, and I was at the battlefield monitoring my section, and for probably 3 or 4 boxes, every visit I was encountering, I was discovering young that had died from hypothermia. Their nests were wet, there wasn't enough food, and so I had to clean those boxes out. And I got to the next nest and I smelled that odor outside the box, and I thought, not again. So I opened the box and I looked, and there were live babies in there, but the nest was a sodden mess. And I knew that if I left it that way, those babies would not live through the night. So I thought about what I had in my car that I could use to help me do a nest change. I almost always take a bucket of dried grass from my mower deck. So I had that bucket, but the only other thing I had in there to put the babies in while I did the nest check was a beach towel. So I formed a nest out of the beach towel, and I began to move the babies one at a time into my manifest nest, and I covered it with the towel. Well, I got to about the 4th baby. There were 5 young. I got to the 4th baby, was putting him in, when the 3 that were in the nest decided they didn't want to be in the nest, and they took off in 3 different directions on the ground. They weren't flying, they couldn't fly, but let me tell you, a non-flying bird can still move fast. So I had to stand there for a minute and try to figure out what to do. I knew I couldn't chase them, because if I chased them, they would go through the battlefield fence and I wouldn't be able to get them back in the nest. Meanwhile, while all this is happening, I have 2 bluebird adults that are dive bombing me, and they're actually hitting me. They're yelling at me and they're hitting my hat. So I ended up doing a herding kind of motion. I went around behind the babies and herded them all back close to the nest, was able to get them all back into the beach towel, put the 5th one in the beach towel, covered the nest up very quickly, and did the fastest nest change on record. One by one, I put the babies back in the nest. I closed the box, and then I covered the entrance hole for a few minutes so that they could calm down. I didn't want them to be so upset that they would try to come out the entrance hole. And then after about 5 minutes, I uncovered the entrance hole, and I went back to my car and I watched for a while. And everything calmed down. The parents started feeding, and everything was just fine. So it was a success, but it was a learning experience for me, just how fast a 12-day-old baby bluebird can move. Very good question. Thank you. Some people say you should clean boxes between nestings. Yes, I definitely recommend cleaning for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. You want to keep the young as low in the box as possible so that anything that lands, a flying predator that lands on the box, can't reach in and grab a baby from the nest. It's also a matter of housekeeping. You want to try to have, you don't want them to carry parasites over from one nesting to another. Let's see. Jim Clark says, are there any nesting materials we can put out for the birds? With bluebirds, as I said, they're opportunists. I would not recommend putting out string or hair or anything that's long and fibrous. There's actually been instances where baby birds have lost limbs because they've gotten the limbs, their legs have become strangulated with string. There was even an article recently, last year actually, in the Virginia Bluebird Society's newsletter, where a female bluebird had used horsehair in her nest. And this happened they couldn't understand why one of the babies wasn't fledging. All the others had gone, and its leg was wrapped up in horsehair. Ah, when is the right time to clean out an old nest out of a box? If you're monitoring your nest box every week and you know about when your baby bluebirds have hatched, you can kind of gauge. They should fledge in a regular season nest, they should fledge by day 18. As soon as you see that all the young are gone from the box, you can clean the nest out at that time because the young will not go back to the box. So as soon as you know for sure that the young have fledged, go ahead and clean out your nest box. When do bluebirds typically nest in Maryland? It depends on where you are in the state. I think the Eastern Shore areas actually start nesting a little bit before those of us in Central Maryland do. I have bluebirds in my yard right now that are staking claim to territory. I have one small nest started, but it's been that way for about a week and she hasn't made any progress. We normally start monitoring our boxes at the end of March, and sometimes that last week of March, you might get an egg in our area. Usually for me, though, it's the first week of April when we start seeing eggs in most of the boxes that we monitor. How high off the ground should a nest be? That depends on the monitor. I'm 5 feet tall, so my nest boxes are at eye level so that I can monitor without having to poke and prod because you really don't want to do that. Unfortunately, the bluebird boxes at Antietam National Battlefield are all top opening, and that's not user friendly for people like me who are height challenged. So I have an automotive mirror that's on a long scope, and that's what I use to check inside the boxes at Antietam. No, the Maryland Bluebird Society does not sell birdhouses. We advocate and recommend the nest box plans that the North American Bluebird Society has on their website. We sell nest box kits. That's not the truth. We do sell nest box kits. You can contact a county coordinator by going to our website, and we can tell you what we have. We just recently received an order. We have a gentleman, an older gentleman who's actually in his 80s that lives in North Carolina that builds boxes for us. So if you want to check with one of our county coordinators, we'll be happy to hook you up with a nest box or two if we have any in our inventory. What food should we provide in winter? Dried mealworms are so expensive. I don't know if any of you participate in any of the Bluebird pages on Facebook. Recently, there was an article, or I don't know if it was an article, it was an opinion piece that was posted by a rehabilitator of songbirds. And she opposes the use of dried mealworms because the exoskeleton is so hard and there's no moisture in the dried mealworm. If you're going to feed dried mealworms, I truly, truly suggest that you rehydrate them. Put them in a bowl or a cup and pour boiling water on them and let them sit for a few minutes so that they can rehydrate. If you think about it, especially in the hotter months, the only liquid that the baby birds receive inside a nest box is what they get from insects. And if it's really hot, they need that moisture more than anything. So really in the only time a bluebird family might need help is if something happens to one of the adults and the other adult is left to try to feed nestlings by themselves, or early spring nesting if we get a lot of rain and food sources are not available, insects are not available, and of course berries we usually don't have in early spring. So then you could supplement with live mealworms. You can also offer suet. The Cialis.org website I gave you also has some suet mixture recipes that use lard and peanut butter and some fruits. So those would be the things that I would recommend. There's a recipe on there also that uses non-medicated chick starter, which is a really good supplement to give growing birds because it has the calcium they need for their bones. Let's see. We have fierce competition between house sparrows and bluebirds in our one box. How do we discourage the house sparrow to give the bluebird peace to nest? If the bluebirds have already started a nest and they have an egg, you can try the sparrow spooker. If you're not at that point, putting up a sparrow spooker is probably going to scare away the bluebird as well. You also don't want to put up a sparrow spooker and leave it up there all the time, because the house sparrows then may become desensitized, and then you've lost one of the tools that you could use to protect your nesting. The problem with house sparrows, as I said earlier, is if you have a male house sparrow that has bonded to your nest box, it's a pretty good chance he's not going anywhere. So I would personally recommend trapping and removing him. Will PVC pipe nests discourage sparrows? I think you might be talking about the PVC nest box. In some areas, people have claimed that the sparrows do not like them, but sparrows are adaptive, and they're very smart, and they will figure it out. And I do know people who use these, but sparrows will use them as well. So you might be able to get away with using those kinds of boxes for a while, but eventually the sparrow is going to adapt. I was given a nest box for Christmas. How soon should I set it up? Right now. Bluebirds are establishing territory this very minute. So, well, maybe not this very minute because it's dark, but they are looking for nesting sites right now. So get that box up as soon as possible. If you have any questions about how best to mount the box, give us a call and we'll walk you through it. I live next door to a wooded walking path and see bluebirds at suet feeders. Last year, a bluebird tried to use a nest box under my deck. Why would a bluebird select a nest box there? Bluebirds will nest just about anywhere they find a cavity that they think might work for them. As I said before, because of habitat loss, especially in some areas where maybe people aren't putting up nest boxes, there's simply no place for these birds to nest. So if they find something that they think just might work for them, they're going to try it. They don't know what we know. All they know is there's a cavity and this might be okay for my nest. Should the nest box opening face in a certain direction? That's a good question. I try very hard to face most of my entrance holes out of prevailing wind. That keeps rain and cold air from blowing into the nest box. It's not always possible to do that. So that's just it depends. I would say that depends more on the nesting site itself. You also want to try to be sure that the entrance hole, especially in summer nestings, don't get the afternoon sun shining inside the entrance hole, because that will cause the inside of the box to heat up. And that's not good for your nestlings. Other than removing nesting material, is there a way to discourage house sparrows? There's a male house sparrow that has been sitting on one of my nest boxes, but no nesting material yet. Okay, let's talk about that one first. I think we've addressed it a few times, but I don't think you can say it enough. The male house sparrow will bond with the box, and he will sit on that box and sing. And basically his song is cheep, cheep, cheep. It gets on your nerves after a while. But when he's doing that, he's trying to call a female. Sometimes he'll start a nest by himself. Sometimes he'll wait till the female comes. On the cialis.org website, I would recommend that you go on there and read about house sparrows. They have some other strategies using fishing line, and I think it's called monofilament. I've never had to do that because I am aggressive with house sparrows. I trap and remove, as I've said. That's really all I have to say. There's no magic pill for the situation at all. They bond to the box and they're going to stay there and try to nest. What foods would you recommend putting out to encourage bluebirds? I do not feed mealworms unless I have a situation that absolutely calls for it. Um, a few years ago, I had a bluebird pair that were nesting in near my driveway. And when the 5 young in the box were about 8 days old, the mother was taken by a hawk. And the father bird was left to try to raise 5 hungry babies by himself. I think he really could have done it and would have been just fine, except he had a pair of mockingbirds that were harassing his every move. He would fly to the ground and they would bombard him. He would try to take a bug back to the nest box and they would bombard him. And so in that situation, I broke my rule and decided I was going to offer mealworms to get him over the hump. So I had a little portable mealworm feeder. It was on a bowl that sits in top of the stake. And I would put it about 15 feet from my porch. And then I would sit on my porch. And the male bluebird would come and get the mealworms and take them to his nest box and feed the babies. And the mockingbirds weren't going to come that near me, so everything was fine. But I would take the bowl in when I was done feeding, and I would feed once in the morning and once in the evening, and then he was kind of on his own for the rest of the time. And he managed to get all 5 of those babies to fledge successfully. So if you have a situation and it's insects are plentiful, you don't need to feed anything because natural foods offer the best nutrition for baby birds. But if you have a situation like an early spring nesting and it's raining for days on end and there are no bugs and there's no berries, then certainly you can offer mealworms, you can offer a suet mixture, and the birds in those instances will definitely appreciate any help you can give them. Michael, thanks. We enjoyed watching. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. If you're going to build a bluebird house, what is the best plan to use? On the North American Bluebird Society website, there is a list of bluebird plans there. And while NABS no longer does the approval process for nest box plans, we do recommend some as being probably the safest to use. That being said, it also depends on where you live in the country because our climates are all different. Our predators are all different. The box I like the most is the standard NABS Eastern Bluebird box. And I like to build my roofs a little bit larger. I build a 10 by 10 roof to offer a little more protection from sun and wind. Okay, this is something that I've never had, though I have heard people talk about it. I had a cowbird drop an egg in my bluebird box last year. What do you do? That's a really tough question because cowbirds are parasitic. They don't raise their own young. They actually put their eggs in the nests of other birds and open cup nests, nest boxes, whatever they can fit into. If your nest box has a 1.5-inch entrance hole, in theory, cowbirds should not be able to get inside. Sometimes they do, and what they do is they remove an egg or two from the host bird, and then they lay their own egg or two in that host bird's nest. Cowbirds are native birds. Legally, you need to leave the egg in the nest. It hurts me to say that because cowbirds actually don't need to incubate. Cowbird eggs don't incubate for as long as some other bird eggs. So those babies hatch faster, they grow faster, and a lot of times the young from the host bird will not survive. But if you're asking me legally what you should do, cowbirds are native birds, so you're supposed to leave those eggs alone. Fortunately, I've never had that situation. We were successful for a while with bluebird broods. They still visit our feeders, but sparrows have gotten more interested. I remove sparrow nests daily. I thought it was safe, but they killed a bluebird inside the nest one time, so I just took it down. Okay, again, John, I actively trap. I have an in-box trap that I put in the box, and then I remove the bird. That is really the only safe way I've ever found to allow bluebirds and chickadees and swallows and titmice to nest safely. You can also block the whole of the box for a while, a week or two. That will keep the bluebirds from going in and being killed. And it may even encourage the sparrows to move on. But that's a very passive measure, and it may or may not work. That's the best I can offer. Can you put a sparrow spooker up before the bluebird has laid eggs, or will they be deterred as well? If not, how to make sure the bluebird gets to lay eggs? There's a theme going on here, I can see. You can try to put the sparrow spooker up, but I can tell you that a lot of times, if you make a change like that to the box before the bluebirds have laid their eggs, they will abandon the nesting. It's really important to let them lay that first egg and then get the sparrow spooker up. And then you need to watch the box to be sure that the female, at least, has accepted the change. You want her to go in and lay her subsequent eggs. In my experience, I use the spookers all the time on my nest here at my house, and all the time except once. Last year was the first time I ever had a female that flatly refused to go into the nest box, and I had to take the spooker down. I tried pinning all the streamers in one place. I tried taking the streamers off and adding them one at a time. As soon as I added a streamer, she was done. So I ended up having to take it down, and that nest just went unprotected. Fortunately, no house sparrows came and bothered them, so that was a good thing. How much ventilation for those very hot summer days? It depends on the nest box. And that's one of the criteria for choosing a nest box, is to be sure that you have cross ventilation, especially. So you want ventilation on both sides of the upper part of the box, somewhere under the roof, so that the hot air, which rises, can exit the box. You also want to try to be sure that the entrance hole does not face the sun in the hottest part of the day. Is there anything you can do to protect fledglings who take off into open space? Lost one to a crow last year. I don't know what it is about the larger birds, but they somehow seem to know. I guess there's an excitement in the air on Fledge Day. Make sure that your nest box is not close to, but facing some place where your bluebirds can fly to. Some trees, some brush, something, so that if they do, that they don't have a long flight in order to get to safety. I have a nest box with a rectangular opening. It seems to keep away the sparrows, but I worry that with a larger opening, the inside of the box could get wet. Is a box with a round opening better? Okay, I think you might be talking about a slot box. I have actually two. I have a slot box on one slot box on two of my trails. My bluebirds don't really use the slot box for me. They prefer the round opening. But I don't notice with those boxes that the interior gets any wetter, because the roof seems to protect them pretty well. So I would really, I really don't think that the slot box is a concern as far as keeping the nest dry. Try to make sure when you're sighting it, though, that if your wind normally comes from the northwest, like it does here where I live, try to maybe face your box in the opposite direction. I heard you say open grassy area for boxes. We live in a wooded area but have many bluebirds. Is there anywhere we can put boxes, or would you advise against it? I would not advise against it. I'm not saying bluebirds never nest in woody areas. The only thing is, if you're going to try to have bluebirds nest in those areas, you have to remember that's house wren territory. And house wrens are notorious for piercing eggs and removing newly hatched young from nest boxes. So that's the only thing that I would offer. If you're going to put up nest boxes there, go ahead and visit the cialis.org website and read about wren guards. Very important. I know that groups of bluebirds will sometimes roost within boxes during cold winter nights. Following the breeding season, it is a good idea to put some dried grass or pine needles into the box to provide some insulation for winter roosting bluebirds. I know a lot of people who do this. I also know a lot of people who take their nest boxes down and instead put up a roosting box. Roosting boxes are different from nest boxes because the entrance hole is at the bottom. There is no opening at the top, so the warm air stays inside the box. And there are usually dowel rods inside for the birds to actually roost on. Sometimes when birds roost in a nesting box, they'll pile so many in there that the poor birds on the bottom can suffocate. But I don't normally put anything inside my nest boxes. I let the birds do that if they want to. One year I used to, a few years ago, have a female who for a couple of years in a row, when fall got here, she would build a nest. And the first time she did that, it scared me to death because I thought she was going to lay eggs, which she didn't. But she roosted in that nest all winter long. And then when spring got here, she just refurbished the nesting cup, and she was the first bluebird that year to lay eggs. So, when should a birdhouse be put out or set up? Right now. Do it now. Do it as soon as you possibly can because they're staking claim to territory right this minute. Are bluebirds big enough to eat cicadas? Yes, they are, and they will. How do you trap a sparrow? Okay. I have an in-box trap that's called a Van Oort trap. You can read more about this on the cialis.org website. It's a trap that you put on the inside of the nest box, and when the bird goes inside, it hits the tripping wire and it blocks the exit so the bird cannot leave the box. So that's how I trap a sparrow. Do they return to the same box year after year? I think I can tell you, yes, they do. Sometimes, because I've had females that lay white eggs, which is, it's not common. It's not really rare, but it's not common. And I had one female at my park at my trail at Ballinger Creek Park in Frederick that she used the same box for 3 years in a row. And I could tell because the eggs were white, and I could also tell because she had a fertility issue. And almost always her first nesting of the season, she would lay 5 eggs and none would hatch. And then the second nesting, she would lay 4 eggs and maybe 1 would hatch. So I knew that it was the same female. So yes, I would say sometimes they do come back year after year. I also have 2 pairs that nest, one nests on each side of my house. And the one pair will start in one box and then move to another box on that side of the house for the second nesting. And then if they go for the third nesting, they'll move back to the first box. How do you trap house sparrows to remove? Okay, I think I've covered that. But Sharon, if you want to email me, I'll be happy to talk to you about that in a little bit more detail. And Elizabeth, same thing. If you want to email me, I'll be happy to talk to you about that in person. I think we've covered the basics of it. What do you use to catch sparrows in a trap? Okay, if you're talking about a ground trap or a repeating trap, millet, corn, cracker crumbs, popcorn, crumbled up biscuits, all of those things are things that house sparrows will go after. Let's see, I've already answered your question. You're welcome. How do you spell Cialis? Okay, the website I think that Angela is going to share with you, it's www.sialis.org. Everything you could ever want to know about bluebirds is on that website. In a wooded area with little open space, where is the best place to spot a nest box? The area has bluebirds throughout the year. Okay, Michael, again, I would say as open an area as you can. Just remember that wooded areas are house wren territory, and house wrens are not very friendly to other cavity nesting birds. They will remove eggs. They will remove newly hatched young if they can. So keep that in mind and read on the Cialis.org website about wren guards. Why do mockingbirds bother bluebirds so much? I don't see other bird species bothering them. Well, mockingbirds do because mockingbirds are also very territorial. And if they're nesting in an area that's close to where your bluebirds are, you're going to have some issues. Usually they settle down a little bit once they themselves start nesting. Robins can also be extremely territorial when it comes to nesting. I used to have a robin that every time I went out on my deck, because he was nesting on a shelf out in my yard, he would yell at me and tell me to get off his deck. So robins are also very territorial. John, thank you very much. You're very welcome. Thank you so much for listening. Box on my property. Very good. If you have any questions at all, please let us know and we'll be happy to help you. I have not had much success feeding bluebirds with using dried mealworms on a platform feeder during the winter. Do you have any suggestions, perhaps changing the type of feeder? You can change the type of feeder, or you can offer a different food. Again, dried mealworms are not the most nutritious. They're better than nothing, but I would recommend doing a peanut butter suet. It offers a lot of fat. You can mix in fruit. You can mix in oatmeal. You can mix in lots of different ingredients that will actually be more nutritious for your birds. Okay. Let's see where else. In regard to mealworms, I was recently told they should be sprinkled with calcium carbonate to assist with egg strength. Yes. Feeding too many mealworms, feeding mealworms to birds is like feeding candy to children. There's not a lot of nutrition. There's some fat, which is good to help them get through the cold weather, but they are calcium depleting, and that's very, very dangerous, especially for the female birds and especially for young birds if they're feeding these to their nestlings. The nestlings aren't getting the calcium they need for their bones to be strong. So you can dust the mealworms with calcium powder that you can buy in a pet store. You can also feed the mealworms foods that have calcium, because that will improve their nutritional content. The average lifespan for an eastern bluebird, you're not going to like this. It's 2 to 3 years usually. Some have lived longer, but it's usually 2 to 3 years. Okay, and that's all the questions I see. I think we're good. Do you see anything I missed, Angela?
No, that looks like everything.
Okay.
So thank you
so
much.
You're very welcome. This was great fun. Thank you so much.
Yes,
and please feel free to pass on our contact information, and we're happy to answer any questions for people if they think of questions for later.
Yes, so for all the attendees, look for a follow-up email. We'll include the links that we shared tonight, email addresses and contact information. So look for that. And then also, barring any technical difficulties, we do hope to post the recording of the webinar. So look for that again on our social media channels and in our newsletter. So thank you so much, Kathy, for all that fantastic information. And thank you also to all of our attendees for all your great questions. I think everyone is ready for bluebird season, and it's right around the corner. So thank you so much for all this information to get us ready for that. So,
Very good. Thank you so much for inviting me.
all right. Take care, everyone, and have a good night.